Hi, have a nice listen. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. I've never been the type of guy to doubt my wife. Sarah and I have been together for nearly 10 years, married for 6. We met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and never looked back. It was the kind of relationship people always envied. I'd always hear comments from friends like, "You guys are goals," or "I wish I had a love like yours." On the outside, our life looked perfect. I work as a financial analyst at a firm in Chicago, making decent money, and Sarah teaches 2nd grade at a local elementary school. We live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood where every house looks like a postcard. We go on vacation once a year, spend weekends with friends, and we're saving up to start a family soon. But over the last few months, something's changed. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have our ups and downs, right? But the signs were there, little things that, in hindsight, I probably should have paid more attention to. Sarah started coming home later and later, blaming it on meetings or catching up on paperwork. She always seemed distant, distracted. When I asked her if everything was okay, she'd brush it off, saying she was just stressed out from work. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But things escalated quickly. She started spending more time on her phone, texting late into the night. Whenever I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd laugh and say, "Just work stuff, babe. Nothing to worry about." I wanted to trust her, but that uneasy feeling began creeping in. The breaking point came when my best friend, Alex, mentioned something that hit me hard. We were grabbing drinks after work one night, and as we were catching up, he casually said, "Hey, I saw Sarah downtown the other day. She looked like she was with some guy." At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a friend or someone from work. But Alex's words kept gnawing at me. Why hadn't she mentioned meeting anyone? Why was she suddenly so secretive? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. That night, I asked Sarah about it. I kept it light, casual. "Hey, Alex said he saw you downtown the other day. You were with someone?" She looked surprised for a second, but then quickly smiled. "Oh yeah, that was Ethan. He's a colleague from work. We grabbed coffee during our lunch break. No big deal." Ethan. I'd never heard her mention him before. And suddenly, all these red flags started popping up in my mind. Why had she never talked about this guy before? Why was she meeting him outside of work? But I didn't push. I wanted to trust her. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe I was just being paranoid. But over the next few weeks, things only got worse. Sarah became more distant, her phone practically glued to her hand. She started going out more, claiming she was hanging out with friends or working late. I didn't know what to think anymore. One day, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I know it's wrong, but I couldn't resist. I picked it up just to see if it was something innocent. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from Ethan. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Was this really happening? Was Sarah cheating on me? I didn't know what to do. I put the phone down, my hands trembling, and sat there in silence as I tried to process everything. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry all at once. I couldn't bring myself to confront her right then. I needed time to figure out what to do next. But one thing was clear. My marriage wasn't what I thought it was, and I was about to go down a rabbit hole I never saw coming. After finding that message, I felt like my world had been flipped upside down. I sat there, staring at Sarah's phone, wondering if I had just imagined it all. But I hadn't. The evidence was right there, clear as day. The trust one had in her was shattered in a matter of seconds. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head. The late nights, the distant looks, the endless texts. Every little thing that seemed innocent before now felt like a piece of a bigger puzzle I didn't want to solve. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, demand an explanation, But the other part of me was terrified. What if she really was cheating? What would that mean for us? For our marriage? The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. I didn't want to go into this blind, accusing her without knowing the full story. I needed proof, something concrete. So, I started paying closer attention to her habits, where she went, and who she talked to. I didn't like spying on my wife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. Sarah continued to act like everything was normal. She kissed me goodbye every morning before work, made small talk over dinner, and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway. It all seemed so calculated, like she was trying to cover her tracks. I hated feeling this suspicious, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't get that text out of my mind. A week later, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One evening, Sarah mentioned she'd be working late again. Another meeting with Ethan to go over some project. My stomach churned, but I kept my cool. I told her I'd be working late too, and that we'd catch up later that night. She kissed me goodbye and left the house, just like any other night. But this time, I didn't stay home. I waited about 20 minutes after she left, then grabbed my car keys and drove to her workplace. I parked across the street, just far enough so she wouldn't see me. I figured if she really was meeting up with Ethan for work, it would all be innocent, and maybe I could finally put my mind at ease. But that's not what happened. I watched as Sarah walked out of her office building, laughing and talking with a man I had never seen before. It had to be Ethan. He was tall, well-dressed, with this confident, almost smug look on his face. My heart raced as I watched them get into his car and drive away. I followed them, careful to keep my distance, but close enough not to lose them. They didn't go to another office or a cafe. They drove to a small, quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes away. My stomach turned as I watched them pull into the driveway of what looked like Ethan's house. Sarah got out of the car, laughing and smiling in a way I hadn't seen her do with me in months. She followed him inside, and that's when the truth hit me. I sat there, frozen, staring at the house. There was no mistaking what was happening. I felt sick. I wanted to storm in there, demand answers, and tear this guy apart. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home in a daze, my mind numb with disbelief. The entire drive, I kept asking myself how we had gotten here. How had our marriage fallen apart without me even noticing? I stayed up all night, thinking about what I should do next. Should I confront her? Should I leave? My mind was a mess, and I couldn't think straight. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone was hiding this huge part of her life from me, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. Was this just a fling? Or had she been lying to me for years? The next morning, Sarah came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and asked how my night was. I wanted to scream at her, but I held back. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more time to process what I'd seen. Over the next few days, I acted like everything was fine. I pretended to be the same loving husband I always was, even though inside, I was falling apart. I kept telling myself I'd wait for the right moment to confront her. But every day that passed, the anger inside me grew stronger. One night, about a week later, I couldn't take it anymore. Sarah was in the kitchen, making dinner, and I was sitting at the table, watching her move around the room like nothing was wrong. I couldn't stand it. The lies, the deception, it was eating me alive. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaky but firm, "we need to talk." She looked at me, her expression calm but slightly confused. "Sure, what's up?" "I know about Ethan," I blurted out. The words felt like a punch to the gut as they left my mouth. Her face went pale for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but defensive. "I followed you," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I saw you with him, at his house. I know what's been going on." Sarah stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with shock. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "David, She froze, unable to finish her sentence. It was like watching a dam break. All the confidence she'd been wearing like armor crumbled, and there, in the silence of our kitchen, I saw her panic. For the first time, she didn't know what to say or how to cover her tracks. The facade was gone. "Just tell me the truth," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the anger was bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to explode. "How long has this been going on? Was it just a fling? Or have you been lying to me this entire time?" She stared at the floor, her hands gripping the counter behind her like it was the only thing keeping her from falling. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "David, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "What does that even mean?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "You've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back, and I'm supposed to believe this wasn't intentional?" She flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but didn't deny it. "It started a few months ago. I swear, it wasn't planned. Ethan is just someone I work with. We started spending more time together, and one thing led to another." Her words felt like daggers, each one slicing deeper than the last. Months? She had been lying to me for months, pretending everything was normal while she was off with this guy. My stomach churned at the thought of her being with him, laughing with him, sharing things she should have only been sharing with me. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked, my voice quieter now, laced with disappointment. "If something was wrong in our marriage, why didn't you come to me instead of turning to him?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know, David. I don't have an excuse. I wasn't thinking. I felt like we were drifting apart, and Ethan was there. He listened. He made me feel different. Different. The word hit me hard. I wasn't enough for her anymore. She needed something, or someone, different. And instead of trying to fix what we had, she turned to someone else. "Do you love him?" I asked, dreading the answer. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I don't think so. It's not about love. It's just complicated." Complicated. That word felt like such a weak excuse for the betrayal I was feeling. She had turned our marriage into a lie, all because things had gotten complicated. I stood there, unable to look at her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was going through. But instead, I just felt empty. "I need some space," I muttered, turning away from her. "David, wait," she pleaded, reaching out for me. "Please, let's talk about this." But I couldn't. Not now. Not when my entire world had just come crashing down. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, tears streaming down her face. I drove around aimlessly for hours, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. How had we gotten here? How had our perfect life turned into this mess? I replayed every moment of our marriage in my head, searching for the signs I'd missed. Maybe I'd been blind. Maybe I'd been too focused on work or too comfortable in our routine to notice when things started to change. Eventually, I ended up at Alex's place. He'd always been my sounding board, my go-to when things got tough. I didn't know where else to turn. When he opened the door, he took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "What happened, man?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't even know where to start, so I just blurted it out. "Sarah's been cheating on me." Alex's eyes widened in shock, and he let out a low whistle. "Damn, man. I'm sorry. That's brutal." We sat down, and for the next few hours, I unloaded everything. The late nights, the distance, the message from Ethan, and finally, the confrontation. It felt good to get it all out, but it didn't make the pain go away. Nothing could. "What are you gonna do?" Alex asked after I finished. I don't know, I admitted. I'm so angry, but I still love her. It's like I don't even know who she is anymore. Alex sighed and shook his head. Cheating changes everything, man. Even if she's sorry, even if it wasn't serious, it's gonna be hard to come back from this. I knew he was right. The trust was gone. The foundation of our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know if it could be rebuilt. I just need time to think, I said, rubbing my temples. My head was pounding from all the emotions swirling inside me. Alex nodded. Take all the time you need, man. You don't have to make any decisions right now. I stayed at his place that night, crashing on the couch. But even though I was exhausted, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Sarah with Ethan, laughing, smiling, sharing moments that were supposed to be ours. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just ignore this. I couldn't pretend like everything would go back to normal. Something had to change. I had to confront Sarah again, and this time, I needed answers. The next morning, I went home, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was sitting on the couch, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she stood up as soon as I walked in. "David, please, can we talk?" she begged, her voice cracking. I took a deep breath and nodded. "We're going to talk, but I need you to be completely honest with me. No more lies. No more hiding. I need to know everything." She swallowed hard, her eyes filled with guilt. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." I sat down, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead pressing down on me. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I needed to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Sarah sat across from me, her hands trembling in her lap. There was a long silence between us, and I could see she was struggling to start. "David, she began, her voice shaky. "I've been a terrible wife. You didn't deserve any of this." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Why did you do it, Sarah? What did I do wrong?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head. "You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault." I was feeling lost. We've been together for so long, and I felt like I was losing myself in our marriage. I know that sounds like an excuse, but it's the truth. Her words stung. We had built a life together, a home, memories, and now she was telling me that it wasn't enough for her, that she felt lost. I had heard stories of people growing apart, but I never thought that would happen to us. I needed something different, something to wake me up from this feeling of emptiness, she continued, wiping away her tears. And Ethan, he was there. He showed me attention, made me feel like I mattered. But it wasn't love, David. I swear, it wasn't. Her confession cut deep, but it wasn't surprising. In a way, I already knew. The cold distance between us, the nights where we were just two people living under the same roof, pretending everything was fine. Still, hearing her say it out loud felt like another betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "How long, Sarah? How long have you been seeing him?" She bit her lip, glancing away, clearly ashamed. "About 6 months. 6 months. 6 months of lies, of sneaking around, of pretending to be my loving wife while she was with him." I felt sick to my stomach, like I'd been living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Everything we had built together felt like it had been for nothing. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, dreading the answer. She hesitated, and that was enough of an answer for me. My heart sank. I could feel the anger rising, but I pushed it down. Exploding now wouldn't fix anything. I needed to stay focused. "Yes," she finally admitted, her voice cracking. "It only happened a few times, but—" I held up my hand to stop her. I didn't need to hear the details. The fact that it happened at all was enough. There was no undoing it. The damage had already been done. I stood up and paced around the room, running my hands through my hair as I tried to process everything. I had no idea what to say or how to feel. There was part of me that still loved her, but another part that wanted to walk out that door and never look back. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can." I stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built a life with, was sitting there, broken and ashamed. But I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. Trust, once shattered, is almost impossible to rebuild. "I need time, Sarah," I said, my voice firmer than I felt inside. "I don't know what to do right now, but I can't just forget about this. I need to figure out if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I love you, David. I know I messed up, but I don't want to lose you." Her words felt empty, like a desperate plea to hold onto something that was already slipping through her fingers. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, needing space to clear my head. Over the next few days, I stayed with Alex again. He didn't push me to talk, but he was there when I needed to vent. I appreciated that, but even with his support, I felt lost. Part of me wanted to work things out with Sarah, but the other part couldn't stop thinking about her betrayal. How could I ever trust her again, knowing she had lied to me for months? One evening, after a few days of space, I decided to drive back home. I didn't have a plan, but I needed to see Sarah, to see if anything had changed. When I got there, I found her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "David," she said softly, standing up, "I didn't know if you'd come back." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, taking in the sight of her. The woman I had loved for so long, who had once been my entire world, now felt like a stranger. "I've been thinking," I finally said, breaking the silence, "and I don't know if I can do this." Her face fell, but she didn't say anything. I could see the guilt and regret written all over her face, but it wasn't enough to erase the hurt. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I continued. "I don't know if we can fix this." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, David. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut off all contact with Ethan. Whatever you want. Just please don't leave me." Her desperation tugged at my heart, but I couldn't ignore the voice in my head telling me that something was still off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a part of me that felt like I wasn't getting the full story. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "You said it wasn't serious, right? That it wasn't about love?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, it wasn't about love." "Then why did you stay with him for so long? Why didn't you end it when you realized you were making a mistake?" Her eyes darted away for a moment, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. There was more to this story than she was letting on. "Sarah, what else aren't you telling me?" The room fell silent after my question. Sarah froze, her face pale, and I could see her mind racing to come up with something, anything, to say. But she knew the time for lies and half-truths was over. There was a part of me that wanted to hear her out, but another part, the hurt part, was ready to walk away for good. Still, I needed the truth. I deserved it. I didn't end it, David, because, she stammered, her voice shaky. Her eyes were wide, like she was bracing for impact, because I didn't know how to stop it. Things got complicated. My heart raced as she hesitated, and I couldn't help but think the worst. What did she mean by complicated? Was it more than just an affair? Did she fall in love with him? My mind ran wild with possibilities, none of them good. "What do you mean by complicated, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You told me it wasn't love, so what is it? What haven't you told me?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap as her gaze shifted to the floor. The tension in the room was unbearable. "Sarah," I pressed, feeling my patience slipping. "What else are you hiding?" She closed her eyes, her body trembling as she took a deep breath. "I was pregnant." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood there, completely stunned, as the gravity of what she had just said sank in. Pregnant? My heart pounded in my chest, my vision blurring with anger, confusion, and shock. You were pregnant?" I echoed, barely able to get the words out. What are you saying?" Sarah sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands. "It was Ethan's." Time seemed to stand still. The air was sucked out of the room, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. My mind couldn't process what I had just heard. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, had not only betrayed me but had carried another man's child? "Sarah, what the hell are you talking about?" My voice was a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You were pregnant, and you didn't tell me?" She nodded, her face still hidden behind her hands. "I didn't know how, David. I was so ashamed. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I paced the room, feeling like the walls were closing in. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was something far worse, an entire life-changing secret she had kept from me. My thoughts spiraled into chaos as I tried to make sense of everything. How long had she been pregnant? Did she lose the baby? Was she still pregnant? "Are you still—" I couldn't even finish the question. The thought of her carrying Ethan's child made me feel physically sick. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had a miscarriage a few weeks ago. That's why I was acting so strange. I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't want you to know." I stood there, numb, as the truth finally came out. All those nights when she seemed distant, the mood swings, the strange behavior, it all made sense now. But the knowledge didn't make it any easier to digest. My wife had gotten pregnant by another man, and she had been hiding it from me. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined. I let out a bitter laugh, the kind that comes when you've reached your breaking point. "So, not only did you cheat on me, but you were pregnant with his child, and I had no idea? You lied to me for months, Sarah. You let me think things were just complicated when the reality was so much worse." I know," she cried, her voice desperate. "I was wrong. I should have told you, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, and I didn't know how to fix the mess I made. I never wanted this to happen." I shook my head, feeling the anger boiling over. "You've already lost me, Sarah. You lost me the moment you decided to betray me. I don't even know who you are anymore." She broke down in tears, collapsing onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. But I couldn't comfort her, not this time. The weight of everything she had just told me crushed any sense of sympathy I might have felt. I felt broken, shattered into a million pieces, with no idea how to put myself back together. "I loved you," I said, my voice hollow. "I gave you everything. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for some guy who showed you a little attention?" "I made a mistake," she whimpered, her face streaked with tears. "I know I did. But I'm begging you, David, please don't leave me. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to counseling, Enough, Sarah," I snapped, cutting her off. "You can't fix this. You can't undo what's already been done." The room fell into silence once more. I could feel the weight of the situation suffocating me, the walls closing in. I needed air. I needed to get out of there before I said something I would regret. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I got into my car. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not after everything I had just learned. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, my mind replayed Sarah's words over and over again. Pregnant. miscarriage. Ethan. It was all too much. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like everything I had known was unraveling before my eyes. Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road, my body trembling with emotion. I rested my head against the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. I had never felt so alone, so betrayed, so completely broken. I didn't know what to do next. How could I go back to that house, to that life, knowing what I now knew? Could I ever look at Sarah the same way again? Could I forgive her? Or was this the end? I sat in my car for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in every direction. The betrayal, the lies, and the weight of everything Sarah had confessed felt like it was crushing me. I thought we could work through her affair when I first found out, when I thought it was just an emotional thing, a momentary lapse. But the pregnancy? That was a line I never thought I'd have to deal with. The fact that she had carried another man's child and hid it from me was like a knife twisting in my gut. How could I ever come back from this? I don't know when it happened, but eventually the tears stopped. My mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. I looked at my phone, several missed calls from Sarah and a couple of frantic texts. She was probably beside herself with worry now that she knew the truth was out, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to be near her. I needed time. Time to think, to process, to figure out what my next move was going to be. But one thing was becoming painfully obvious. There was no saving this marriage. No amount of therapy, no amount of apologies, no amount of effort on her part could erase the damage that had been done. I had already lost her the moment she crossed that line with Ethan. This was just the final nail in the coffin. As I sat there, staring out the windshield at nothing in particular, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Sarah had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I started the engine, my hands steady on the wheel. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't driving away out of fear or anger anymore. I was driving away because I was ready to leave this behind. When I got back to the house, it was late. The front door was unlocked, and as I stepped inside, I saw Sarah sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring blankly at the floor. She looked up when she heard me come in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought you weren't coming back." I didn't respond. I walked past her and straight up the stairs to the bedroom. My mind was made up. There was no point in dragging this out any longer. As I started grabbing clothes from the closet and throwing them into a bag, I heard her footsteps behind me. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm leaving," I said flatly, not bothering to look at her. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm. "David, please. Please don't go. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes, I swear. Just give me a chance." I shook my head, pulling my arm out of her grasp. "There's nothing left to fix, Sarah. You lied to me. You betrayed me in the worst way possible. You kept something like that from me, and now you expect me to just forgive and forget? That's not how this works." "I know I messed up," she cried, tears streaming down her face again. "But I love you, David. I love you so much. Please don't leave me." The desperation in her voice was hard to hear, but I knew I couldn't give in. Not this time. "Love isn't enough, Sarah," I said quietly, zipping up my bag. "Not after everything that's happened." I turned to face her, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could really look at her. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the person I had promised to spend my life with. She was someone I no longer recognized, someone I no longer trusted. "This isn't just about the affair," I continued. "It's about how you handled it, how you lied to me over and over again, how you let me believe we could work things out, knowing there was so much more you weren't telling me. You carried Ethan's child, Sarah. You hid that from me. How am I supposed to come back from that?" Her sobs grew louder as she realized there was no changing my mind. "I thought I could fix it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." "You can't fix this," I said, my voice firm but calm. "And I'm not sure you even want to, deep down. Maybe this was your way of telling me we were over before I even realized it." She shook her head, reaching for me again, but I stepped back. "I don't know what I'm going to do next," I admitted, "but I know I can't stay here. I need space. I need time to figure out who I am without all this." Her cries echoed in the silence as I walked out of the bedroom, my heart heavy but my mind resolute. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned for us, but it was the only ending that made sense now. I had been holding on to something that was already gone. As I left the house for the last time, the cool night air hit me like a wake-up call. I got into my car, the same car I had been driving aimlessly just hours before, and started the engine once more. But this time, I wasn't lost. I knew exactly where I was going. I drove to a hotel on the other side of town. It wasn't anything special, just a place to lay my head while I figured things out. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a strange sense of peace. This chapter of my life was over. It was time to start writing a new one,